And we're back. This is the Colombia Calling podcast. I'm Richard McColl in Bogota. Emily is on the line in Medellin. We're
Hiya.
talking to Emily. Hello again. We're talking to Emily this week because, well, it's always great to have the back and forth between us both. But Emily has done a quite phenomenal piece of reporting that can be
Thank
found
you.
in the magazine Delayed Gratification. It's on the shelves in your local, magazine provider shop in the UK. So that's WH Smith's, Waterstones, airport places, and so on. Delayed Gratification, the December issue. That's episode or issue number 60. And she's written about
15-year anniversary issue of the magazine.
wow,
I know. For a long form print only mag, that's not a bad anniversary to be hitting.
15
So
years.
yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
see,
Yeah.
but
And it
it's the topic. Oh wait, no, go on. Give it some more
no.
pushing.
I
Push
was
the
I
lady.
was just going to say that it will be online at some point once the next issue comes out. And
Okay, so
obviously
it's like
once it
1
goes
month.
online, I will be sharing that. And I hope to do an audio version for Colombia Calling once I'm allowed by the magazine to do so.
Well,
Because as usual, I've written
yeah.
6,000 words, and I get that not everyone has the patience to read it. So I hope to read it to you at some point.
And of course, you have to ask me if you're allowed to do it here on the podcast.
Always asking behind the scenes. So many permissions, so much
Oh yeah, of course.
strictness.
Oh yeah, I'm very, very strict. Not clawing around looking for. No, I'd love it. I would love it because you're talking about Ukraine and you're talking about the young men and not so young men from Colombia heading over there as well. Mercenaries, soldiers of fortune.
Soldiers of fortune. And the word it's become a propaganda issue, effectively, the word mercenaries.
Mm,
Um, its legal definition is a bit vague. There's a UN working group definition, countries have their own definitions, but the Ukrainian army is saying our foreign soldiers are not mercenaries, they are volunteers. And anyone who calls them mercenaries is a Russian propagandist. And not wishing to be on the wrong side of that argument, I have been quite careful in the article whether
yes.
they are salaried foreign soldiers fighting in a war in which they do not have the nationality of either side. So it's an interpretation issue.
It's the dogs of war. It's everything you've ever read about or any sort of bad B movie you ever watched. Was it the Genovese who were mercenaries back in the day? And I mean,
And it was
yes,
the original modality of war.
yes,
Nation state armies really only arose with the consolidation of European nation states. What are we talking? 16th, 17th centuries. For a long, long time, soldiers were from anywhere and were paid. And what we're
yes.
seeing is once again a rise in that modality of war. And a rise that comes with an enormous number of problems for international humanitarian law. And the UN Working Group on Mercenaries published a really interesting report in October, effectively saying that that there is a rise in use of mercenaries globally in wars and in irregular conflicts, including, for example, that of Sudan, which is also a destination for Colombian soldiers, a big one, as we've seen.
So let's take it right from the very beginning. I mean, those of us Colombia watchers, people here, we know about these things, and at some point or other, we've had like something forwarded on TikTok, or the gunfight in Sudan, and there's sort of 5 or 6 Colombians shouting and trying to pull a comrade out of
Horrible
some
videos,
area.
yeah.
And I've not seen anything from Ukraine. I know that you have. Of course, we've had Haiti. Again, they were guns for hire sent over to assassinate Jovenel Moïse, the president at that point in Haiti. I don't know what to say. We have a lot of young men who have military training and then have no prospects or possibilities post-military training, and a lot of young men, and I guess women too. I'm sorry, I don't know if there've been female volunteers.
Some in Ukraine,
Yeah.
whether or not they are sent to the front lines or used in the same way as the young men are, seems to me incredibly doubtful. But they are there. Certainly medics.
Because again, and in the piece that you wrote, there's the images. There's some images there of the, like, let's say the recruiting campaigns And of course, you've got a couple of guys there, and a woman as well. Saying we're
Yes,
fighting for the cause.
La Queen, who is really the leader, that's what she's known as. They all have, all of these soldiers have chapas de guerra, which range from your sort of classic, slightly unflattering Colombian nickname like Gordito to where you're from, and a lot of Greek gods. There's a lot of Apollos and Atlas. There's a lot of those sorts of names. La Queen she's one of the earliest recruits, and she's long been leading the Ukrainian international recruitment centers, TikTok and social media. And she will be in a field in Ukraine dancing cumbia. She will be waving a Colombian flag, wishing you happy Colombian Independence Day. It's so clearly targeting Colombians. And the use of La Queen, who's a young and very pretty Colombian woman, I think is not an accident. Though, in Spanish, there's all kinds of Latin American nationalities being targeted. There's a lot of Brazilians there as well. The Colombian focused nature of these social media channels is quite clear when you have a look at them.
Well, I mean, clearly, again, we have this huge conscription in this country, and then after their periods of mandatory service, what do? I mean, they're let back out with a skill set that doesn't lend itself to too many things here within the country.
No, absolutely true. And even if you manage to stay in the army, even if you're then hired as a professional soldier, the structure of the army is such that you either stop being promoted and are thrown out, or you hit your compulsory retirement after 20 years. Which if you started when you were 18, 19, you're in your 30s. And pensions are not hugely high, and it's not like the US Army where you study alongside your soldier activities. You don't come out with a master's degree in something. You come out and are effectively faced with either you've got the resources to start a business or you do private security. An enormous number of these guys do private security.
Yeah.
And, that is certainly in the veterans associations I've spoken to. They will say this is the real problem. Veterans need to be treated better. This government doesn't support the army. It's not that it's an intentional untruth. It may seem true, but I think it's only part of the story. And I think a bigger part of the story is that the peso, if you're offered 19 million of them, there's no amount of veterans association activities that are going to outweigh an offered salary of more than 10 times a minimum wage in Colombia.
Yeah.
And increasingly, countries and criminal groups outside of Colombia are seeking Colombians and offering them these kinds of salaries. And that's really at the heart of it, I think.
So we're looking at things like the Sinaloa cartel. I think you mentioned it in there as well.
Yeah,
in the article.
Cartels are definitely hiring Colombians. There were 11 Colombians arrested for killing some Mexican soldiers working for the Sinaloa cartel. But it has its own momentum also, right? There are thousands of Colombians in Ukraine, many of whom are gaining drone experience because that is the nature of the war in Ukraine with Russia. Therefore, all of these other groups who are increasingly using drones seek out soldiers who've been in Russia, Ukraine to operate their drones. So it creates its own new set of problems.
So, I mean, what we've sort of walked around this one point here, but the Colombians are an ideal fit for this role because of the nature of the country from which they come, from the, let's say, the notable inequality or lack of income and opportunities, and then militarized. Because of course we know about the conscription. If you are of an upper class or of financial means, you can pay your way out of your conscription. And of course, so therefore you've got what sadly is left over are these young kids with no other opportunities, coming from places with no viable education and sort of long-term prospects. And what do? They come from these families when they are now seen as the breadwinners because they're the young man.
No, you've hit on it exactly, Richard, because what I really didn't want this article to do was to propagate this idea that Colombians are in some way more violent and better soldiers because they're Colombian. Because you see that in some of these articles about mercenaries, the idea of like dangerous Colombians. And it's a class issue. It's an issue of opportunities and resources and education. And it's a class issue not only within the country, but globally, right? Ukraine is heavily backed by NATO. NATO are paying large parts of the salary that soldiers are receiving. NATO specifically pay the mission bonus. So these are countries with resources seeking out bodies from developing countries to throw into no man's land. And there's a militarization of the psyche, the skills that these Colombian soldiers have. They have told me en masse, don't really cut it when you get there. Because the skills that you have if you have been fighting insurgent groups or paramilitaries or armed groups, post cartels, are so different from what you need to take back positions in a drone swarmed no man's land in Ukraine. It's a bit facetious to pretend that these Colombians go ready for battle. And even the ones that think they are get there. And I get really scary and terrible texts and phone calls from both young men that I had met before they went and total strangers saying, this is hell, get me out of here, I don't want to die. This is not what I thought it would be. And I'm a freelance journalist, so
my knee jerk to that is what did they think it would be? I mean, obviously not what they were trained for in either high altitude or jungle in Colombia, and an irregular warfare of what is ostensibly a guerrilla insurgency. We could get into all this. There's all sorts of different diametrics that we can bring into that one. But let's say a guerrilla insurgency and criminal, but it's almost trench warfare with drones in Ukraine.
It's trench warfare with drones. It's a horrible combination of 20th century European warfare and a kind of postmodern apocalypse. And I think some of these guys, quite fairly assume they will receive a large amount of training. And some of them are getting there and they're not getting a lot of training. And a lot of the commands they're having to learn in Ukrainian, and the translation is being done on their phones on Google Translate. And I think you could imagine if you're going to Europe to fight a war between two global powers, you might expect maybe a lesser level of chaos than what a lot of them are reporting to me that they're encountering, where instructions don't match up to the actual mission, where they don't have the logistical backup they're told they'll have. I think there's a real sense of surprise I get from a lot of these guys that they report.
This point is, again, we've come back to the same thing as their bodies, and I think it's a Civil War term, is the forlorn hope of the people who were just thrown into the melee at the front. And this is what it sounds like to me.
And they are recruited as frontline infantry, because that is, for obvious reasons, where there are vacancies, so to speak. And there are some guys who think they'll go and they'll do other roles like driving or drone flying. Very few guys end up, far from the front lines flying drones. You might get to do a bit of surveillance droning, but really it's assault battalions. And you are told on social media or these TikTok accounts that you will get 19 million pesos per month. That calculates very specifically if you're part of certain battalions doing a certain number of missions per month. What a mission means is usually an assault mission. It's going into no man's land. It's retaking positions. It's being out in the open under drones. And I get told you don't even need eyes anymore in this war, just ears. And I've done interviews with these guys where they can imitate every different type of drone. And I've got, audios that transcribe very oddly because the different hums of different types of drone, from a surveillance drone down to a grenade drone, down to a kamikaze or a missile drone, they all make quite different noises. And the guys who've been there a while can identify by the sound of them. And I think it's sheer terror. It's absolute terror.
It is entirely post-apocalyptic, as you are mentioning.
Yeah.
Now, do we have any any sort of figures to hand of how many Colombians we know to have gone over, or any? Do we have a guess? Because they've got to be, I mean, in the hundreds. Do you think thousands?
I was told by numerous people who don't know one another, who estimated to me between 3,500 and 5,000
That's a lot of people.
are currently there. So
Yeah.
how many have already died or left is a different question. All of these estimates are rough. The Ukrainian army is not providing information on this. I think they would rather not. But if you look at, for example, the Facebook memorial page for international volunteers, you're looking at 60% Colombian flags on there.
Really?
Yeah. And Maidan Square in Kyiv, there's a whole section of portraits of Colombian men with Colombian flags. And it's stuffed. It's a huge number, and I don't know if we'll ever know quite how many it was. The chaos, not only during battle, but after battle, in terms of who's disappeared, who's dead, who gets sent home, who's been identified, is shocking. And, I maintain a sense of being shocked quite intentionally, because I think we can normalize these things too much and say, oh, but war is dirty and war is bad and war is always chaotic, and that may be true, but then we need to not normalize that so that we can keep pushing back against war as an option where it crops up, because it's awful for not only these young men but their families.
They have a minimum requirement they sign up for of time.
They do. It's a 6-month minimum contract. It's a 5-year contract with a 6-month break. So you have to do your 6 months. And, the stories are ugly about passport retention, about being told you'll go to jail unless you go on X mission, about being forced onto missions when you don't feel like you're physically able to. One of the biggest injuries that I saw was esquirlas, shrapnel. So things explode near you and you end up with fragments of either missile grenade or just earth in your body. A lot of these guys have suffered nerve damage. So there's bits of their legs they can't feel, there's bits of their arms they can't feel, they can't always walk properly. Big numbers of injuries from tourniquets that are left on too long when guys are bleeding. Burns are a big thing. So a lot of these, to reach 4 missions in your 3-month period, which is how you get the mission bonus, it's extremely unlikely you'll do that because you'll either be injured or killed. And a lot of guys with injuries, I've been reached out to by a couple of soldiers who I didn't seek out, who weren't part of my sort of interview roster, but who found me, saying they're trying to make me go on an assault mission when I can barely walk and I'm going to die.
I don't even know what to say. I'm kind of speechless about this thing. I mean, one part of me says, well, obviously we know that war is hell, the most trivial statement I'll make ever.
No, but it must be said, Richard. We must keep saying it. I really believe that.
These poor men.
I know.
And women. What does La Queen do out there then, apart from TikToks?
So here's the question. With a number of the influencer recruiters, so you don't see going out there. But if, a lot of the guys some of whom I know who have deserted or left after their 6-month break, will occasionally comment on the TikToks of these guys and be like, you've never even been to the front. What are you talking about? How are you recruiting people? How could you? And the response is pretty aggressive. It's usually on TikTok lives. So a lot of these videos you can't find again. This is a big mechanism of the recruitment, is they run hours and hours of TikTok lives. And people say, oh, how much is the pay? And they go, oh, it's 19 million. And then they say, oh, it's a war, and consider that they have duly warned the people that they are recruiting. And there's a WhatsApp number, and you send your passport and your phone number to this WhatsApp number, and then they reach out to you subsequently, right? But on one, I saw one of these guys who accused me of being a Russian spy on a TikTok live. He's quite an unpleasant character. Anyway, someone said to him, you're not even on the front, you're a recruiter. And he said something along the lines of, why don't you go check what your wife is doing with your neighbor? There's a machismo to this story that I've struggled with a little, because my usual interviewees are rural women and homosexuals. And this has been a very different tone. But what I will say is it's not clear. It's not clear whether some people told me the influencers are paid per recruit. Who knows if that's true? I honestly, there's a lot of chisme. It's a rumor mill, I think, the army and the barracks and the trenches. A lot of things get said that can't be verified. But there's certainly a highly aggressive response if you question these guys.
So the recruitment is social media, and of course all of this networks, and we all live on our phones, and everybody has a phone with a screen on it and so on. And so they then send their WhatsApp number to, again, another WhatsApp, and then there's a middleman here in Colombia, I suppose, and this is someone you met as well.
I met one of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I sent a message to one of these guys on TikTok just saying, like, hi, I'm a journalist, would love to chat. And they're so undiscerning that I got a message a month later saying, hi, you wrote to me, just wanted to check you're still interested in joining the Ukrainian army. And like, my TikTok's got my face on it, and this is an English number. So, there's a sense of just like total desperation. And, and this is in the article, one of my interviewees has a very heavy criminal history, including murder and jail time. And he told me that he has an open investigation against him for rape. Within 3 days of arrival in Ukraine, he's a part of the Ukrainian army.
So there are allegations of him having committed a rape within Ukraine within 3 days.
No, within Colombia. So okay. This is no. I mean, he was a sort of born again Christian.
Okay.
I felt perfectly comfortable sat with him. I believe it's entirely possible, and I tend to believe women, that his former partner was raped by him. It's what I mean is there are unresolved criminal processes against him in this country, and the Ukrainian army either did not check or is not checking, or he managed to lie about it. What I'm saying is there are no requirements. They tried to recruit me. They recruited this man who has done jail time for murder and been a pretty heavy duty part of the Cali cartels by his own account. So the thing about Colombian men having been well trained in an army that's closely linked to the US Army is one narrative. And, well trained soldiers not being able to advance their careers is a real part of this story. Another part of this story is anyone. Anyone can go.
I'm inclined to side. I mean, there's different facets, but in his circumstances, they just don't check.
That certainly was my instinct.
That's what I'm feeling at this. It's like, we just need another body out there, because the minimum 6 month thing, it just rings to me, you're not expected to live.
And many of them are not living, and certainly are not coming out of it with all of their limbs intact. It's absolutely brutal. And I do, we've seen over and over in recent weeks more and more stories about young Ukrainian men fleeing Ukraine. Conscription is decreasingly successful in Ukraine, as it is in Russia. And Russia is also bringing in foreign soldiers. One should say this is not only on one side. And indeed Colombians, but also North Koreans, a lot of Cubans, people from Africa, also various African nations being recruited to Russia. So this is a kind of new modality of this war, is that young men from Russia and Ukraine don't want to be conscripted, quite understandably. And, men, bodies from developing countries are being dragged into it.
I sort of feel I end up trivializing this again, because I spent 3 months in Ukraine when I was just a wee bairn. I was 18 years old. I turned 19 in Kiev. I am now 49, so it was a few years ago.
A couple years ago.
I lived in a Soviet bloc that has since been hit by drones.
Really?
I've checked it out. The family I live with, I know nothing of them for that many years anyway. But you talked about the Maidan Square, where there's all the memorial. This is where we used to sit and drink beers out in the open in the summer evenings. This is hitting home for me. But I'm trying to bring it to let's bring it to the Colombian side of this, because I mean the horrors of war that we get in the in the press from Ukraine is pretty, it's every day.
Yeah.
And hopefully people aren't becoming jaded to it, because it is absolutely savage.
It is, yeah.
And we should not be normalized towards this and the images and the stories. But the Colombian side of things, when we talk about the lack of opportunities and beyond and within the army, and of course outside of the army, and the class issue, and I'm curious about these middlemen that help out, because they almost seem kind of gangster-like to me as well. It's almost like I want to say it, so I say it, not you, but it's almost like sort of legalized trafficking. It's like,
I had a lot of doubts about the incorporator, as is his official
is that
role.
his name? The incorporator.
Yeah, the incorporator. No, I called him Jorge in the article. None of these men have their real names, because I do not wish to compromise their security, and they are hunted like trophies by the Russian army, who have special telegram groups where they have names and faces. You know, they're considered a trophy of war, these young Colombian men. So everyone is anonymous. Yeah, Jorge seemed to me, he had this characteristic shrug, and he seemed to just shrug off any ethical concern about what he was doing. He was paid in Bitcoin by specifically wealthy Polish and Ukrainian donors, though his contract was with the Ukrainian army. In the car journey I spent with him, he couldn't get his Bitcoin wallet to work. So I ended up on the phone to a Ukrainian guy speaking in English, which Jorge doesn't speak, trying to work out how Binance works. This is before the driver, while I was trying to interview the three soldiers in the back, tried to sell me menstrual tea quite aggressively for maybe 15 minutes of the journey. It was a chaotic hour. But Jorge's take is that he doesn't tell men to go, but he doesn't tell them to stay either. And he didn't seem to feel at an emotional level the responsibility of what he is doing. He told me that they have a low chance, he said 80% of them will die. He said he gets messages from family and he doesn't even remember the faces of dead guys he sees or gets sent anymore. And it was all delivered with this quite chilling flatness. And I tried not to make him too much a villain. But within, my first outreach to him on TikTok, he's on a call with me. He's telling me everything. He's telling me they're all going to die. He just doesn't seem to connect with what he's doing level. Neither does he seem rabid about the Ukrainian cause, I should say. I don't think this blankness is born from a end justifies the means. I honestly couldn't work him out and still can't. And we occasionally talk, but he runs a halfway house.
Yeah.
So all of these guys come to a house that he rents. And if you get there, they'll buy your flights, they'll pay for your food, and your accommodation is free. And you wait there until your flight leaves from Bogota airport. It's in this strange little town, a couple of hours outside of Bogota. And I went for breakfast in it. Because again, Jorge is not suspicious of me. He doesn't think that there's anything wrong with what he's doing. It hasn't occurred to him. So to invite a journalist to this halfway house, to the airport, telling me he's paid in Bitcoin, telling me they're all going to die. I am still unable really to make sense of it.
You see, yeah, because my take was that there was something sinister there. Reading the piece, does he have any military background? Did he have, or is he just like this?
He's never been in battle.
Okay.
Which I think, and as one does after you publish.
No, of course.
You wake up in the middle of the night and go, should I have mentioned that? But I equally didn't want to enter into the macho.
Yeah.
He's never even done battle, which you get a lot of with the chief mate and between the guys. But no, he's unscathed by conflict, really. And he also, and this is again another thing it's extraordinary to write a 6,000-word piece and still have things you couldn't fit, and an absolute symptom of the general malaise of my own state of writing. He also, on these TikTok lives that he runs, where he says, here's the number, he also recruits to Ukrainian call centers and Canadian farms. It's just, do you know what I mean? War is so normalized, I think, to some young men, particularly in this country, as is leaving the country to seek, to probar suerte, to seek better opportunities. that this for Jorge is just another thing in a portfolio of here are some opportunities you could have.
He's a fixer.
He's a fixer, and he showed me messages from the Mexican cartels asking him for 100 men at a time. He says he draws the line there. Maybe he does. I couldn't tell you where he draws the line. So it didn't feel to me that he was a man much capable of a line. And he didn't. I asked him about these call centers in Ukraine. Like, why are they asking for specifically Colombian women for a call center in Ukraine? That to me sounds like a scam, almost certainly related to sex trafficking, right? Because Colombian women are a huge target for sex trafficking internationally and into Eastern Europe. And he then showed me some strange video where the woman who's doing the call center was showing the flat the women would be living in. Just so many questions. All of them, deeply laced with concern for anyone who is just writing to Jorge, thinking they won't end up in some kind of slave labor in Western Canada or Eastern Ukraine. An absolute Wild West, I think is what I'm saying, both in terms of the Ukrainian army and in terms of the incorporators. And in terms of the guys themselves. I got a message from one today saying, I'm going to the Congo. Do you want to come with me and we can look at animals? It's his exact message.
Okay. Well, you left a lasting impression there.
I would not like to flatter myself, and it's important to remember that I am the only woman that some of these men had spoken to in a calendar business year. So I don't take it too much to heart. But certainly I had some extraordinary interactions with these young men on video chat.
Oh God. Do you I best not delve into this further. But let's ask in this one. So, I mean, you spent a long time. This is a long investigative piece, as you said, the 6,000 words, and it could have been. I think it could have been a book.
Yeah, mid August was when I started, and it's coming out now.
Incredible. What? So, how many potential soldiers Colombians going to fight in Ukraine did you interview?
So I did 30 full hour-long interviews, and then a few of them I followed up with. The nature of this was that it was totally scattergun. So I was on TikTok, and we hate TikTok, but for the last couple months, God bless TikTok, because the algorithm picked up that I was really interested in Colombian soldiers in Ukraine. So my For You page was just giving me sources. And I sent probably hundreds of TikTok DMs to strange men saying, do you want to talk to me? And the people who got back to me were the people who got back to me. It was quite hard to establish trust for obvious reasons, because I'd never had TikTok before. So my account looks, like a scam. Thankfully, a lot of them did talk to me, but it was a real mix of guys who had already come back. I would sometimes get on the phone and I would be in a bunker. It was a kind of horrible 5 a.m. slot machine TARDIS experience, because the time difference was so massive. And I would always be like, right, well, today it's this guy. So I just, hit video call and I'm in a bunker. Well, one guy was quite horrifically burnt down the side of his face. He was in hospital.
And you were talking to him at a field hospital in Ukraine.
Yeah. And I just never knew where I was going to be or what tone I was going to be met with. It was, my friends have been very supportive and have allowed me to do nothing but talk about this for months, because it has been totally insane. And the video chat nature of it is obviously very jarring. And when I actually went to the halfway house to have breakfast with these 10 guys, I found that a totally different experience, right? Because they were, and I'm really glad I did it, because I think it was much more humanizing for me to sit with them. We ate scrambled eggs and drank hot chocolate together, the 12 of us in this halfway house. And I got to know them in a very different way. Whereas these video chats, sometimes they would be in full uniform with the Ukrainian flag, thinking I would be recording video, and I would have to be like, stand down, at least put down the rifle so that we can talk and I don't have to look down a gun. Because, as I've said, I do viscerally hate all of this violence and war. And I think it's something I wanted to hold on to. And I think most of the better conflict journalists are very really affected by it. They hate it and they find it miserable and unacceptable. And, Martha Gellhorn and, all of the great writers on conflict really fucking hate conflict. Whereas what's that? Anthony Lloyd and the ones who run around and really like it, I think they're missing the point. So for me, it was a hateful couple of months, to be honest. The first couple of months, I hated them because I never knew where I was going to be landing on these video calls. And I would be faced with some really devastatingly injured young guy, or find myself with and actually ultimately I really got on with him, but I immediately knew I wasn't talking to one of these young mercenaries, and I've called him Johnny in the article. He just had a very different vibe, and he had kind of African tribal symbols all over his arm. And I sort of slowly realized this wasn't a kind of young guy who was seeking opportunities. He had joined the Sierra Leonean paramilitary when he was 19, and he hasn't been back to Colombia since. He's a really hardened, lifelong mercenary, who would happily call himself a mercenary, who doesn't say, no, I'm a soldier in Ukraine. He says, I'm a mercenary, and who knows where I'll go next. And he had a very different take on it as someone who has lived and breathed all sorts of different types of irregular and regular conflict. Like I say, we got on. He ultimately offered to bring me back the drone that had nearly killed him as a present.
And they say romance is dead.
I know. I was like, you courtship in a sort of, but I felt like a sort of baffled penguin. They bring each other pebbles and lay them at one another's feet. And I remember I was looking at him on video chat, and I was also quietly thinking where in my apartment I would display Russian weaponry. And it was sort of turquoise green, this thing. It was it was a kamikaze drone. That I think he'd escaped the actual explosion, but he'd been shrapnelled by it. And he sent me a video of him holding it up, saying, I'm going to bring it back to you. I was like, yeah, if you like, but and this is the real thing with, meeting 30 men in quick succession. He was educated and, respectful and kind, and actually very pensive about war. The other idea about mercenaries, I think, is that they're sort of brutish and they like violence. While he's certainly a cynical guy in lots of ways, Johnny doesn't. And he doesn't think it's good, and he hates war, and he hates a lot of the things that he's been a part of himself. There's a philosopher in him, I think.
Yeah. How old is he today then? If he left to go into Sierra Leone aged 19,
he's in his 30s.
Okay, so he's beating the odds as well.
He certainly is beating the odds, and by his own admission is beating the odds. But and he would, and this is the other thing, right? He would say, I don't really know how to go back to civilian life. And nor do a lot of my colleagues here. And that is a problem. You either create programs to reintegrate us into civilian life, or we go into civilian life and cause problems because we bring our massive conflict trauma back into, our homes, to our wives, or these men are stuck in a perpetual cycle of conflict. And, the guy who's going to the Congo invited me to go on some kind of safari with him. Yeah, whatever it is that he expects me to do in the Congo with him. He came straight from Yemen to Ukraine.
Really?
He hasn't been home in a very long time. And, technically he works in private security. But he told me that, local, the big men of the local world effectively have private armies. And the job is technically private security, and you get hired for private security. But he was in what is effectively, a small private army in the Middle East. And that's what he's been doing in various countries for some years now. The nature of what he's doing in Congo precisely, he avoided telling me. He said the work is similar.
And he's guarding a wildlife reserve because he's got such access to animals.
That will be it. That will almost certainly be it.
The work is similar.
The work is similar.
Colombia has a lot of diamonds and other precious metals, doesn't it? As well, it has a
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
you know, because all of these men spoke to me on condition of anonymity, I did get some, extraordinary stories,
So
and I think it helped.
did you get to meet any of the families of these young men you had breakfast with, for example?
No, so a lot of them hadn't told their families where they were going, and that's very common. Is
Yeah.
that mothers and wives? One of them had a wife and a kid. He didn't have a wife and a kid. He had a kid and an ex-girlfriend, but neither of them knew where he was going. And the young farmer from Catatumbo, so I had breakfast with 11 of them. The building works outside are really kicking off. Can you hear it?
Right. It's
Sorry.
all right. It's okay.
I think the giant hole they're digging is being made bigger. Should we just cut this bit? Maybe I don't know. I think that
We
it
can
might be.
try. We can
Yeah.
try. Don't worry.
So the young farmer from Catatumbo, who was one of 6 siblings, just hadn't told more than one of the siblings, and certainly not his parents, where he was going. So the families, I think, find out often too late. Often once something bad has happened, or once they feel able to tell them. Some of these young men have borrowed money from their families in order to go. Some units will pay for your flights, others won't. So Jorge's unit obviously has a lot of vacancies for reasons that we could speculate on, brackets, just murdering young men en masse by sending them into no man's land. And therefore, they're very keen to pay for your flights and your accommodation. Other units, usually ones you're less likely to die in, you have to reach Kyiv, but you reach Kyiv by yourself. So that's kind of the trade-off. So the families, I met women, an amazing and very, very inspiring, and yet depressingly familiar in terms of coverage of Colombia, group of women who are the women who are left to deal with it all when the men are gone. And they're called La Voz de los que no están. They arose out of a WhatsApp group about six months ago. They're now an official NGO who are amazing in campaigning. Basically, if you want to know what happens to your loved one, and if you want any shred of the promised life insurance that often the men went on the basis of in many ways, thinking their families would be looked after when they were gone, you have to go to Kyiv. So these are working class, often campesino women, often mothers from their 70s, who somehow have to find the resources to go to Kyiv and face off with a Ukrainian language military legal system that does not want to pay them money. It is not in the interests of the Ukrainian system to be shelling out money to these women. Very unlikely to get the bodies back. Part of the nature of doing drone warfare with trenches and bunkers is that if there is a body out on no man's land, sending 5 men to go and get that body is a risk that almost no commander is willing to take. So bodies are, by and large, from what I'm told, being left in no man's land. Which means not only are they not coming back to Colombia, but they're not being identified. So they're registered as disappeared, which means that life insurance cannot be paid. So there's a kind of, one could only really call it a clusterfuck, which these women face, having lost, the breadwinner of their family, having not received the money they thought they were going to receive, and they find themselves in Kyiv. And La Voz de los que no están are doing campaigning around this, trying to work with the Cancilleria, trying to, Colombia doesn't even have an embassy in Ukraine. There's no diplomatic channel here, despite the huge numbers going. And obviously, the legal system is pretty hard to navigate, I imagine, even if you're Ukrainian. So there's a lot of work, very grassroots work being done by these amazing women who are, and I hate that this is the case, and it's such a cliche, but it's always the women who are left behind to clean up and make sense of it, and are left to raise the families often.
To make sense of it. Just again, this is just riddled with so many complexities. I'm trying to imagine, the mother of someone from Catatumbo in Kyiv negotiating with paying pensions and insurance officer of the Ukrainian army. It's just not happening. God, what? So, you know, you spent time, you've met these people, you've interviewed, you're on their WhatsApp lists, so they, you know, routinely reach out to you. There are some who are saying, "Get me out of here." Out of the, you said the 31-hour interviews you've done, of those who've gone to Ukraine, how many are disappeared now, or how many are dead?
I have honestly been too afraid to do the survey. But of the 12 who I ate breakfast with, you know, I went to the halfway house and we sat and we shared eggs and we laughed and, you know, we looked out over the beautiful view of Cundinamarca. 2 of those guys are dead. One of whom I reference in the article. He was a guy with blue hair from Medellin, just a sweet guy who wanted a new start. And he's dead now. And we only spoke briefly. He wasn't one of the ones I went to the airport with. But it just rips your guts out. And, you know, I should say, you know, and I think maybe this is another, probably very early for pointing out failures in this article, given that it just came out. But I spoke to a friend of mine who was in the British military, who'd done some work, you know, in the Ukraine-Russia war. And he said that, you know, all of this is worth it and you're being sentimental. You know, Russia is the great evil in Europe and the end does justify the means. And I feel the need to say that, not because I at all feel that way. I think if a war has to be fought with the bodies of young men from developing countries hoping for a new start, being lied to about the salaries they're going to receive, you need to rethink your war. Ideally, we wouldn't be doing war. I know I sound naive, but that's where I come from. But I feel it is important to say that this is a war against a country that has great expansionist ambitions within Europe, and, you know, all of these evils in the eyes of some people, you know, including this friend of mine. I got very annoyed with him because I'd sent these guys off, sent them off because I'm some kind of demented army wife now. I'd gone to the gate with them in Bogota airport, and I'd waved them off. You know, I went with 3 of them, and I had a flight to Panama, so I needed to do a visa run, and I made it work so that I could go to the gate with them. And we ate frisbee together, and their flight was delayed, so we sat around, and, you know, I wasn't interviewing them. We were just hanging out in the departures gate at Bogota airport, and everyone's staring at us because there's this kind of clearly foreign girl hanging out with this very mismatched group of 3 Colombians. One who's like from Caquetá in his 30s, guy from Catatumbo in his very early 20s, and then like a 45-year-old, like very serious, bespectacled former soldier. He just has that vibe. And then I sort of wave him off through the gate. And in my mind, I'm like, if I steal their passports and like burn them, if I get their passports out their hands and like run to the loo and flush them, like I just couldn't stop thinking of ways to try and stop them going. And at one point, one of them went to the loo and like gave me his stuff to look after, and I was holding his passport. And I was like, what if I go instead of him? What if we swap passports and I just go? Like I couldn't stop thinking of ways to stop them going. But they were, you know, resolutely unsentimental, clearly nervous. But, I mean, partly because 2 of them had never been on a plane before, so I think that was a part of it. But it was kind of devastating, and like still is. And 2 of them, only 2 months into their contract of the 3, are trying to leave. One of them writes to me regularly saying, "I'm still here in this inferno, and I want to leave, and I don't want to die, and I don't want to kill anyone. Who am I to kill someone?" And like you say, there is a question of kind of, what did you think that a war was going to be? But the panic and the fear when the reality of war is faced is pretty devastating. And these are just like sweet young guys. You know, one of the guys in the halfway house wanted to start an ice cream business back in Cali when he got home. And one of them wants to get out of debt, and one of them wants to create a better life for his kids and own a home. You know, these are such relatable, normal desires. And in this country, if you're born within a certain social class, these are not attainable desires for you unless you save for decades. And you can fast track that process by taking this risk. But I think the particular nature of this war is one of sheer and total terror. And, the small group of professional soldiers I spoke to were also, they had done more time in the Colombian army, so they were more resolute. They knew better what to expect. But, I sat on the phone with numerous men who just wept while telling their stories. Some of whom were, men who didn't have military experience, others of whom did. One of whom told me he dreams about the blood on his hands. It's all devastating. And I struggled to edit my own work. I just don't think I could read that again. It was bad enough writing it. They were like, "Oh, can you check the lay-in?" And I was like, "Oh, do I have to?"
I think there's an incredible importance to your sentimentality. I don't think that's something that you should be sweeping under a carpet, because it brings us home to the realities. And you are there, I mean, in a fraction of a moment, experiencing what hundreds, if not thousands, of families, from this part of the world have experienced. Albeit from a different position, but you were there with them at the gate, seeing them off. I mean, that's, and I know we've spoken off air, and I know you had to go into the bathroom afterwards and just
I had a big cry, Richard. I had a big cry. And we were, it's all jokey, and you're like eating your frisbee and chatting about the charcos and Caquetá, like whatever it is. And like, and this is in the article. I don't know, spoiler alert, but we were sat in the airport, and it's all kind of quite chilled. And I suddenly hear these 3 trumpet notes. And if you went to a school in England, these are 3 trumpet notes,
like
really well. It's the last post.
Last post.
And it was playing out of Wilson's phone. He'd been scrolling on TikTok.
Good
and he
God.
just freezes. And he's looking at his phone, and it's the first time he's stopped scrolling, and I'm just hearing the first bars of the last post ring out, and I've gone cold. And he turns it around, and it's a photo of 10 Colombians who died in Ukraine with the soundtrack of the last post over it. And he sort of got an image of the Virgin Mary out of his pocket and slid it into his passport. And I wept in the news afterwards. And there are journalists, I'm sure, who think that I'm, over emotional, and that, I have a lot of friends who are like, "Do you remember that piece you did about the manatee? Can you just do more like that? Because this is obviously too much." But if it's not, if it's not too much, then you've gone hard. And I believe, most of my ideas are stolen, but particularly Nausbaum, who writes about emotions being a type of information. I think like this is information you have to retain. And we hugged and waved goodbye at the gate, and I watched them get on the plane. And then this like weird white girl who's been hanging out with this mismatched group of Colombian blokes is heard weeping in the bogs. And that is, I think it's fine. I have written about lots of things that have made me cry. And I sort of hope they always do in some way. And like, apologies to my friends who've had to put up with me throughout all of this, obviously. But at the same time, if you're not crying, you're not looking at it properly, in my view.
I would have listened day in, day out, because it is important. And what strength you're showing. And yes, please, further down the line, when you've got all the other clips together and you feel up to it, and when Delayed Gratification say it's okay, you can now use the rest of your notes. Please do us a piece here for our listeners, because I know I'm going to get emails about this one. So
well, Delayed Gratification is run by 2 of the best editors I've ever worked with. And they're incredibly generous, both in terms of letting me do things about the pieces I've done for them, because they understand that freelance life is not, and while they do commission, they've printed 6,000 of my words this episode, in this issue, which is, nobody's doing that anymore. and they're keeping something alive. And I couldn't do this kind of work that I regularly get to do if these magazines didn't exist. And then, this is not a huge money-making enterprise for them. But written as a freelancer, you get sort of crunched, and
Yep.
you become a part of a very tight profit margin when you work for most media.
Yes.
And there's very few outlets that are left that are like, yeah, go on then, do that for 6,000 words. Maybe someone will read it, and maybe they will. But I do feel very privileged to have been allowed to do it.
Again, not to be trite, this is award-winning style journalism, this kind of investigative stuff. I am the first to say, hopefully, I'm not the last, how incredible it is.
Thank you very
do
much.
This and can, get up and follow the people and meet the people and sit, like you said, and it's the banality of the normal, sitting and eating eggs and having hot chocolate and laughing about puddles and kakita. It's that which rings home.
Yeah,
that's
it
what
is.
The images that we can all see.
Yeah, and it is that, and I think the moments of comedy in it are also so important.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that there's a deep humanity, and I kind of want to write a piece about this because I still follow them all on TikTok. And the thing I see them post most about, what keeps them going and about the thing that inspires them is cats. All these pictures of them curled up in a bunker with a cat who's found the bunker, and they're feeding, that some of their rations to the cat. And there's a kind of human warmth in the care that these men take over the animals that, a lot of them are in abandoned towns. There's a lot of pets left. And these men who are living through these unbelievably traumatic things not only have the time and the care and the generosity and the warmth to sit with this, little cat in their lap, but they want to share it. And there's WhatsApps that, there's such humanity left, even in these unbelievably hideous moments. And one guy who's always uploading pictures of him where he's opening a little window of his full Ukrainian military uniform to show that he's wearing his Atletico t-shirt underneath. And this is the thing that both humanizes it and makes me even more enraged, because it hurts so much more.
I think of the pets. We see a lot of that, like a lot in all of the stuff from Vietnam with like puppies and cats,
right?
And of course our World War I trenches.
Yeah.
And so I guess there's something there. I mean, there must be studies into it that obviously have escaped me over the years, but there must be.
Yeah.
Well, let's wind this down and leave. I know you've got lots and lots of information that to feed us next. This will be, it will be sometime next year when you get on and you do your own, soliloquy monologue on this. And I'm
there's a
looking
couple of great academics who I would love to have on who talk about this more regularly. Because we've talked about Haiti and Ecuador and the cartels, and the wider question has its own momentum. And what comes out of Ukraine? What are the long-term consequences of all of these men receiving training, but also receiving trauma, and where that goes, and whether they are able to demilitarize their own psyches, really, to actually start that ice cream shop, or whether they end up in Sudan, which is where a huge number of Colombians are ending up. And once you're in Ukraine, you're getting offers.
Yeah, you're in there.
You can sit passively, and someone has noticed you're there, and you're going to start getting big cash offers to go to new places.
I can't see post the conflict right now, but I understand exactly what you're saying. I know what you're saying exactly. I can't see past it, but I
just the hope that Colombia would break out of its own generational trauma and cycles of violence is kind of punched in the mouth by the use of these young men in foreign wars that does not enable civic life to recommence.
We've exported our violence to then reintroduce it later down the line. My God, that's a whole nother story, Emily.
So depressing. Sorry.
Well, listen, thank you so much. It's number 60.
Yes,
that's right.
Issue number 60. So you can buy it on the website. or in airports, WH Smith, Waterstones, etc. And as soon as it's online, I will be sharing it on my Substack, where I will also say that I have finally written something that isn't about war crimes. I put an article on my Substack this week, no paywall, about a folklore event called Where the Wild Things Are, which is an amazing sort of pageant, medieval, surreal 3 days of men on horseback dressed as monsters. Because I can be extremely depressing, and I fear I've been very depressing over the last hour. And I know a lot of my work is really depressing, and that's why all my friends are like, remember the manatee piece? And I'm like,
no, stop with the manatees.
Manatee piece. It was fluff, and we all know it.
We'll send you to do Pablo's hippos before
oh my
long.
god, I will kill them myself so that there can be no more articles on them. They say don't become the story. How about don't murder the story?
Sorry.
Don't murder all 30 of the hippos, or maybe.
Where the Wild Things Are is a great piece, a great original piece there.
Thank you.
On Emily's Substack.
It's a fun reportage, just to prove that I'm not, an endless fount of misery and war crimes reporting.
As one friend of mine who worked at, I think was it called the Liverpool Echo or something? Is that one of them said? And the editor went to her, no more rats in council houses, please. No more stories like that.
and yeah, once you start doing them, I mean, I've had this with Rob and Marcus, where they're like, we kind of need an ending that's a bit more positive. And I'm like, oh, but they found the body. And they look at me like, you're cooked. Like, you're cooked. You've been there so long doing this that you think that's a happy ending. And yeah, and that is true.
Let's leave it there, Emily, before we get let's a huge shout out to Emily in Medellin for sharing some of the tales behind the investigation she did into this excellent article that can be found in issue 60 of Delayed Gratification. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Richard.
See you soon, hopefully.
Yeah, inevitably.
All right. Bye-bye. This has been the Colombia Calling podcast. I've been Richard McColl, speaking to Emily Hart. Of course, go to her Substack, sign up there for the Colombia briefing. And of course, you can sign up for Colombia Calling on patreon.com/Colombia Calling. We'll be back next week with further interviews and conversations from the region or about the region. Thank you again, and bye-bye.